Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the last day of the Foundation's 20 Climate Solutions Week. And we've come a long way since Monday morning. Today is the part 7 of the 7th session that we will have had. And with me in the studio is, in his double capacity, Klaus Mielke, both as the chair of the Foundation's 20 during the presidency of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but also as the co-moderator in the latter part. Now, Klaus, using your hat as the chair, could you just sort of take us through the day today?
Yes, with pleasure. And for all of you, a wonderful good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. And my regards again to the studio in Riyadh, from the studio here in Hamburg. Yes, we have a specific program today, and we worked out for a longer time already on some recommendations towards the G20, the prime ministers and heads of state and finance ministers, the people from the central banks, to come out with some positive recommendations they should use for their decision-making in between of the next weeks. We all know at the end of November there will be the summit of G20. So quite a long time from today. Much can happen in between, also with the US elections on the 3rd of November. So to have this in mind and to bring up some inspiration from our side, from philanthropists and foundations, that was our thinking. And we had a fruitful daily program since the last days. And we took it and we worked it in our recommendations. They are now ready, and we want to present them today. And we will discuss them with some representatives of the platform of foundations, F20, that they can say how they are part of the solution, what they can do, that these recommendations can be really used in a positive way. And so it's a full program again, and I'm happy to be here with you also as a co-moderator in that role today again.
Let me address you as co-moderator now. We've come a long way. That's both from the issues, from the topics that we've covered. We had the finance track. We've looked at the nexus, at the diverse nexus relationships, not just climate, but biodiversity, food, etc. Will that be part and parcel of the recommendations?
Absolutely. So
that's just a sneak preview then?
Yes, but shorter, some minutes later, we will get more insights about this. But to have it in, that was very important for us. That was the reason for our program in between of this Solution Week, to focus on the first day on impact investing and sustainable finance, to focus on recovering better on the second day, and on biodiversity and climate and food nexus. So I think it's now a good composition, but it's a long one, because we think also in detail we have to be very precise.
Wonderful. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, we would have preferred to have been in Riyadh at this time, but I think all of us here, the team has become quite used to the Hamburg studio environment. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, now I hope we have already sort of gotten you a bit curious about what the recommendations are all about. We would actually like to focus on them. And there we see Riyadh, and in a second we exchange Riyadh for Argentina, and I welcome Enrique, Maurtua, Konstantinidis as the head of the Climate Change Department of the Fundación Biosfera in Argentina. You've also been for many, many years, Enrique, I've been told, the coordinator of the Climate Action Network Latin America, and you have many, many, many other hats but now you are here because of your specialization on the one hand and your close relationship with the F20 network. And we're about to get into the nitty-gritty of the recommendations, the details of the recommendations. And for that, you might have actually seen him enter. Stefan Schurig is here. You and the team have been working very hard, not just this week, but also a little bit beforehand to sort of put down the pillars, which are part and parcel of the recommendations. So I'm curious, what are they?
Yeah, many thanks, Conny, and regards to Enrique, who is in Argentina, went up very early for this section, so many thanks for that, Enrique. And indeed, as you said, and as you pointed out correctly, Conny, the bottom line for these recommendations is these two elements on sustainable finance and on the different layers of sustainable finance, be it the whole divestment discussion or be it impact investment or indeed regulations on public finance that we need to implement to redirect the money flows, as somebody put it today in these days in our sessions. And the second part is the need for an inclusive approach. We always mentioned over the last days and during the last weeks in our discussions at the steering committee and at different working groups at F20 that there is really a window of opportunity at the moment because people understand, as a consequence of the COVID-19 crisis, that anything that helps to increase the resilience of our societies is also making ourselves more resilient with regard to global pandemics that we sort of didn't expect and didn't see coming at all.
But so that will be repeated sooner or later.
That will definitely be, let's say, subjects of further challenges in the future, I suppose. So, you know, making our societies more resilient really is the ultimate goal and is the bottom line for our recommendations. And we basically start in those recommendations with saying, first, the members of the F20 platform are already broadly committed in doing their part in helping to deal with the immediate consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. Many foundations are actively involved in this already, and they just recommit to continue doing this. And secondly, it certainly is a clear advice that any recovery that we try to implement coming out of this COVID-19 crisis has to be a recovery that ultimately leads to a more resilient society. And then we take it from there and then break it into different issues that we discussed, which were also sort of subject of the structure of our 3.5 days. We basically had discussed the different layers of sustainable finance and the nexus areas, and those are also reflected in these recommendations. But Enrique and I, we had a chat before how best to introduce these recommendations without reading a list of 14 goals and a number of additional sub-goals. And I just said, well, you just go ahead, Enrique. You will do it.
And by the way, on the way to Argentina, Enrique, I'm so terribly sorry. Of course, we had Riyadh there beforehand. And of course, there's a close relationship of you to Riyadh because you're co-chair of the G20 as well. I mean, with so many hats, please take it away now.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Stefan, it's really nice to stay together even with the distance, and I'm very happy that in this context we can still move ahead, because that is actually what is important when it comes to climate change. We actually need the action to continue, because climate change does not stop. And this is why we prepare this document. And I think that it's important that we can actually amplify these messages. I think this document has 4 main key messages. And those key messages goes around the the issues of alignment of the national and joint G20 efforts. This is something that is very important. This is a fight that cannot be fought by one country. Of course, there are countries with more responsibility than others, but this is something that needs to happen in every country and at the same time collectively. All these efforts need to be aligned with the Agenda 2030, the SDG goals, the Paris Agreement. And this is why the recovery packages that we actually are talking about nowadays to recover the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important that we try to direct them in this direction. So, Stefan, what do you think? What do you think about this? Is there something that resonates with the rest of those recommendations that we prepare?
No, I think you framed it well, and we just said that we have to make sure that we are very concrete. So the 4 overarching goals, and you just go through the other ones as well, are more of a general nature, but then we really list those concrete measures, like a clear commitment for phasing out coal, for example, a clear commitment to increase the NDCs, to apply to the UNFCCC process, a clear commitment for ramping up ambitions in the national climate plans. So there are these lists of very concrete recommendations, and I think you framed them well. What's the second one, Enrique?
Exactly. Thanks, Stefan. And then that's where we come in when it comes to create action plans that go beyond the trillions, shifting the trillions that we normally talk when we talk about climate action. Because when we talk about G20 countries, we talk about the most powerful economies in the world. So they have a responsibility. And in this regard, finance is a key issue. Yeah. To align financial flows is something that is super important if we need to enable more action, especially in those countries that are more vulnerable and that are actually in more need of climate action.
So one of the key points that was mentioned several times, especially on our first day on sustainable finance, there has to be a price on carbon. Those environmental costs are not priced in yet, and a price on carbon would do justice to this lack. And that's a clear recommendation in our list, a price on carbon. And the second one that was made several times is a mandatory carbon disclosure, so that you basically price in the impacts of climate change, the impacts of loss of biodiversity, price this into any kind of financial activity that you do. Enrique.
And related to that is something very important and something that is becoming more pressing nowadays, especially in countries like my country, developing countries that are subject to international debt that actually put an additional burden to the people and the society. And this is why the third pillar would be around providing debt reliefs, including debt moratoriums and financial and capacity support. This is something that is very important, especially for most of the developing countries and emerging economies, but in particular to those poorer countries. I think it's something that is very crucial to pay attention and to actually show solidarity and try to show that this is something that we need to come out from in a collective effort.
And you could see that. In our discussion yesterday with the V20. I think it was really, really important to involve the voices of the vulnerable countries to be considered in every kind of policy making and every kind of setting that the G20 countries will come up, because certainly every activity of the G20 matters for many, many more countries and goes way beyond the geographical boundaries of those 20 countries.
Exactly. And this actually brings me also to the final point, which is something that that is very important in this new idea, old idea that we actually, nothing is independent, nothing is in silos. And this is why it's crucial that we keep talking and emphasize the interlinkages between the challenges that we have nowadays. It's not about climate change alone. It's not about biodiversity or finance. It's about everything together. And this is why our 4 overarching recommendation is around make the water, energy, food, health nexus and the climate and biodiversity nexus. This is something that is crucial if we want to actually achieve a sustainable development in our future, in our children's future. I think this is something that is very important. And this is something that G20, again, can and should lead in a way that ensures that things are not going in different parts of separate and different actions that actually solve momentaneously some issues. This is something that we need to think in a way that is interconnected and something that needs to actually happen around the world in a very connected way. This is something that in the past few days we also discussed in this event, and I think this is something that people could resonate with if we keep talking about how to solve all these crises that actually are coming all together.
Yes, and we've received a number of feedbacks during the last days that something that was very appreciated, it seems, is that we really try to pin it down to actionable targets, actionable suggestions and recommendations to the G20. And this is why we have this rather long list, but I strongly encourage everyone to have a dive into. My last point, would just to add what Enrique already said, is when it comes to the nexus, or let's say the overlapping area between addressing a global biodiversity loss and protecting our natural resource, not just as carbon sinks, but also because of the home of our global biodiversity, and other climate-related sectors like the energy sectors. When it comes to this overarching areas, we thought it was important to then really go a bit deeper even and develop a clear list of recommendations to the G20, but also to the UN climate regime and to the conference on the CBD, the conference or the Convention on Biodiversity, and this report that then lists those recommendations on what we call the nature-based solution concept is been ready to launch in a couple of weeks from now. So we will build on these contents, we will build on those recommendations, and those are recommendations that we take very seriously.
When Klaus was mentioning earlier that, of course, it's a process and that the big summit at the end of the presidency of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is at the end of November, there will be some time to actually sort of digest the recommendations from the F20, but then of course everybody will also get recommendations from the C20, from Urban 20 and all the other groups. Yesterday we were talking about a potential alignment, or at least sort of talking about issues that are core issues for humanity that the G20 needs to work on. That is something that you will do also sort of to look at what other groups are doing at the same time?
Well, that's a good point. Thanks for raising this, Conny, because the first note in our recommendations clearly states that we don't expect these to be totally exhaustive, because the F20 mission is pretty much on a focused field between climate action, basically. And of course, there are a number of additional subjects discussed in the context of the G20 and discussed in the different engagement groups that are as important as our own recommendations, of course, and they should be seen complementary. Yeah. But one other effect that you also mentioned that came up by surprise yesterday in our discussion was really that encouraging the different engagement groups to improve their own joint process in developing joint positions, be it by doing joint statements or by even doing a joint sort of event of this kind where these content has been really sort of put together into actionable recommendations coming from the different sectors. That would indeed be cross-sectoral thinking that we wish to see in the future, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also good to see that Enrique is not just a good friend of the Foundations 20, but also sort of has the lead on climate issues in the C20. So some of the messages might actually be sort of reiterated and strengthened. And if they come from diverse groups, then they will probably find, well, let's say, a bit more resonance than that. Okay, well, for now, we wish you good continuation on your work. And thank you, Stefan and Enrique, for presenting those points. Where can one read them up if one wants to?
Well, you can certainly download it on our website from F20, and you probably, I hope, will also hear about them in the next weeks and months to come.
Great, thank you very much. And Enrique, again, thank you very much for getting up early.
Thank you very much to you both, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. Looking forward to continue the work, and hopefully this G20 this year could actually continue to put the climate ambition on the table, because it's something that we really, really need for the future.
Thank you so much. And as we said, spanning the world, there's one call. We need to have the chance to survive on this planet. The planet will survive, but whether humanity will do so is up to us. Thank you very much, Stefan, for having been with us for now. And ladies and gentlemen, this is expectation management in the rest of our time together, so to 3 o'clock. We are going to have two longer keynotes from very important speakers that are looking at not just the recommendations, but also at the process behind it. And then we'll have the recommendations reverberated within the Foundations 20 network. Like what can you do within the recommendations, which part of the recommendations might be closer to your particular foundation network idea. That will be coming in a moment, and as you might see, we have Klaus back again. So Klaus, we are going to talk to Mika Ohbayashi in a second. She will be sharing her views with us. But last year you've worked very closely together during the Japanese presidency.
Absolutely, and it was a great experience for us to be in Tokyo with Mika and her colleagues from the Renewable Energy Institute Foundation, and they made really a tremendous job. Gathering 400 people for the high-level event in Tokyo at that time. And we had many different meetings in the same time, and that is the occasion if you are really on the place where the partner foundation is working and the country where the G20 presidency is located. That is now missing somehow, but Mika, great, hello to you, that we are now connected again, and all these good memories are there, and also the steps we worked out with our recommendations in Tokyo for the Osaka summit. Osaka was a G20 summit last year. And so to have this continuity in our process, I think that's really a big favor. And we will continue on this continuity.
Absolutely, and we already sort of involved the Italians that are going to be the G20 presidency next year. Now, let me do the formal introductions. This was a bit sort of chit-chatty. Mika Ohbayashi is the director of the Renewable Energy Institute, and I think within that context, you have become a household name in Asia. Personally, strongly committed to the global energy transition, and you, as I said, were the focal point of the G20 platform last year in Japan. It's wonderful that you're with us, and for you, spanning the world from Argentina now to Japan, you're probably about to go to bed. Thank you very much for staying up late and sharing your ideas now with us. So please take it away, Mika.
Good morning, Enrique. Good afternoon, Stefan, Klaus. And good evening for friends in Asia Pacific. Now we are at the kind of 8 o'clock, so it's fine that I have some time to go to bed. My name is Mika Ohbayashi, Director at Renewable Energy Institute. We are working on building renewable energy-based, eco-safe, resilient society. Thank you for a nice introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to join the discussion on the role of G20, and especially of us, and for climate crisis and green recovery with you, colleagues around the world in this fragmented situation. The G20 was born out of the global financial crisis that followed the Lehman Brothers collapse in 2008. 12 years have passed since then, and the world is now in the midst of not only the first global economic crisis since 2008, but also a new, hitherto unimaginable crisis, a pandemic caused by a new type of coronavirus. This new crisis is forcing us to make a fundamental change in the way we live. People are now living in the 2-kilometer radius of major cities around the world, where contact with other people has not been established. I no longer have attended the international conferences or commute to work in crowded trains. I spend my days talking with people over a monitor and attending a series of meetings set up one after another. The pandemic has caught us by surprise, but we've already been warned for years and years that large-scale infections were a major risk. In its 2015 Global Risk Report, the World Economic Forum ranked the rapid and widespread of infectious diseases as the second top global risk that would have a significant impact if it occurred. That is not only WEF that warned us the widespread of infectious diseases, the possibilities were increasing. In the midst of this crisis caused by COVID-19, the voices of scientists have been heard more than ever. Fears of unidentified bills are preoccupying us, and we are wondering what to believe. The only thing we can rely on is analysis and information backed by data and research. And we need to rethink the fact that many experts predicted a major outbreak of an infectious disease, but we have failed to take advantage of the warnings. The lesson is that we must urgently prepare for the risks that have become so obvious that they are coming. And the greatest risk facing all of humanity today is the climate crisis. While we can find the response to infectious diseases, there is no cure for the climate crisis. The threat of the climate crisis, like the current pandemic, will hit the world and cause more harm to the vulnerable in society. And climate crisis is expected to increase the threat of infectious diseases. And just like the warning of this disease already issued, we seem to be taking no serious action on climate crisis, even though the risks are already evident around the world. CO2 emissions must be cut by 7 to 8% per year from 2020 to leave the planet safe and capable of sustaining life. The corona crisis is also causing significant changes in the way we use energy. The impact of the Corona crisis on the climate crisis needs to be considered as a top priority, as well as how to recover social and economic activities due to the coronavirus. The G20 countries have a significant role to play. The greatest deterrent to a green recovery in the G20 economies is low fossil fuel prices, and eliminating subsidies for fossil fuel would generate about $2 trillion a year for the G20 economies. Build Back Better and green recovery create the opportunity to achieve that decarbonization we all want, to build economies and societies based on renewables. The specific measures of government's green recovery vary widely from region to region and country to country. We must call on the G20 countries to emerge from this deep economic downturn and build a new economy. If we do not act quickly, we risk missing the opportunity to unlock hundreds of billions of dollars to be invested in the green energy sector. Based on the lessons learned, we must choose to make bold changes that will increase our resilience to the projected crisis and risks. Substantial decarbonization to prevent the climate crisis will require a range of systematic changes, including energy transition, food system, changes in the way cities are built. In recovering from the corona crisis, let us invest in the future without returning to the old system of business as usual, the old normal, the system that uses large amounts of fossil fuels. We need to see this crisis as a turning point in the social system and implement policies that will attract new investments and create new jobs. If we tackle the two crises of health and climate at the same time and apply a holistic economy-wide perspective, the world will not only recover better, but will be healthier, greener, and more prosperous for all of us. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mika, for getting us again into the subject and opening up all the different facets, especially sort of those, again, that are the double crisis that we're facing right at the moment, COVID-19, and of course the underlying climate and biodiversity crisis. Klaus, again, now as my co-moderator and an insider, you and Mika have had, of course, quite a number of discussions. What would you like to sort of add or put more emphasis on?
Well, thank you so much, Mika, my dear co-chair. All the basket you laid out now for the big questions we have in front of us. We have the headline of our recommendation with Response Ability 2020. You in your country now perhaps have a new ability because you will have a new prime minister, a new government, and perhaps you can say a few words how it's important that we do it in our countries with our specific governments, what has to be done, and then to try to find the right instruments to bring them together on the international scale in the G20 group, in the G7 group. Japan is also in the G7. And so what is this national approach? Second point, perhaps you can stress on this, that is the business world. You do a lot now, since a long time with companies in your country to raise their voice together somehow with us as foundations, what has to be done. Perhaps you can stress on this, also encourage others worldwide to do the same with the companies in their countries.
And may I add something more? I mean, not that you should answer in half an hour, but, you know, talking about countries, taking responsibility for their own action. The question was about Japan, but of course headlines were made by Ursula von der Leyen's plan to actually increase the ambition within the EU until 2030. So how does that resonate in Japan?
Thank you very much, Klaus, for questions. I understand one is the kind of a national government actions, and second is the kind of non-state actors actions. Yeah, it is true that we see the new opportunity in our country, the changes of the government and the changes of the politics. So, but it is just formed like 2 days ago or something, that the new cabinet. So we are not sure that which direction the politics and the government will go. But at the same time that we had that about 8 years longer administration, and we couldn't see the major changes in climate actions. But at the same time, we saw the huge changes in energy sector, like we introduced the unbundling to incumbent utilities, and also the liberalization of the retail market, so the people can choose the energy that they want. And also renewables are really expanding in past 8 years, like it was about 8%, but now it is 18%. And those 8% increase is almost from the solar and wind, that kind of new types of renewable energies. So we are seeing on the ground the very changes in energy sector. And I believe this new government, which was formed 2 days ago, that they will proceed these changes to go forward. And actually, Japan will face the changes of the new energy policy in next year, that we will about to start the discuss of the new strategic energy planning. And then I'm sure that the government see the real change on the ground, and they try to reflect that changes in their policies as well. So please continue to encourage the Japanese government to get involved in the center of energy transition in the G20 countries. And certainly the German government could collaborate with Japan about the new renewable energy policies, that transition, actually that now the Japanese industry and the government is very much interested in exploring the offshore wind in Japan. So the European countries really advanced in that sector. So probably that we can go together to expand the wind energy potential in Japan. And at the same time, so in Japan that we see the hydrogen is a kind of sometimes a fossil fuel-based hydrogen. But that together with Germany, that if we untap the potential of renewables in Japan, like we could turn that policy into the green hydrogen-based society. So that is my response for the first question. And the non-state actors' actions towards climate change, that yes, it is totally amazing. That is one of the force to encourage the Japanese government to go forward for the energy transition. For example, we established the business network called Japan Climate Initiative 2 years ago. We started with 150 companies. But now that after 2 years, that it increased that 500 companies joined. And they are raising their voices for the government, to raise the renewable energy target in the national energy policy. And also they are requesting the government that the easier procurement process for renewable energies, because they want to become 100% renewables users. So those kind of voices and actions are occurring in Japan, and also young people in Japan is getting more and more interested in climate change actions. And then those kind of new, how can I say, that new voices that together with the global voices, that we can push our government to go forward for that more climate-friendly policies.
Thank you very much for that additional analysis that you just shared with us, Mika. And we know that you're going to stay up for another 70 minutes so that you can do the wrap-up of our Climate Week together with the co-chair, the other co-chair, and of course with Klaus here in the studio. So thank you very much for staying awake. And ladies and gentlemen, now we get back to sort of our time zone, and I'd like to introduce our next keynote speaker, i.e. a person whose organization actually focuses on a lot of different aspects, and some aspects, of course, that weren't part of our discussion. The community Jameel has different sections, and there's one on poverty, water and food, something that we didn't actually discuss, the idea of water. Then we have education, we have health revolution via machine learning. All of that is in the umbrella of the community Jameel. We are now talking to Fady Jameel, who is the President International, and I would like to invite him. Oh, there you are. Fady, can you take it away? Can you share your thoughts with us, your profound thoughts that are building on all these different ideas that the community Fadil is doing?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me for this keynote. Very briefly, I'd like to thank the F20 for hosting us today and the Climate Sustainability Week. Also, the King Khalid Foundation, particularly Her Royal Highness Princess Basma bint Badr bint Abdul Muhsin, and CEO Her Royal Highness Prince Nof bint Mohammed. Our organization has been involved in philanthropic activity for 75 years. This year is our anniversary. We work across climate, health, and education, and are committed to evidence-based research. Today, I'd like to highlight three of our initiatives that address climate change in different ways. From our workings with institutions and universities. Number one is the Jameel Water and Food Systems Lab, which is located at MIT and produces cutting-edge research on the impact of climate change on the world's most valuable resources, namely water and food. Mm-hmm. We also see many initiatives within MIT that address these issues, hopefully for them to spin off commercially. Poverty Action Lab, JPAL, is a global research center working to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by scientific evidence. It's anchored by 200 professors at universities around the world. We've been working with JPAL since 2005. Its co-founder, Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, back in 2009, won the Nobel Prize for Economics for their novel experimental approach to tackling global poverty. And finally, the Jameel Institute at Imperial College, which we launched last year, which is led by Professor Neil Ferguson, has been conducting world-leading pandemic modeling for COVID-19, providing evidence-based guidance to global organizations and policymakers, such as the WHO and governments around the world. Looking at the future, we're very happy to say that these organizations will be working together to tackle two of the most pressing challenges facing the GCC in particular, climate and health. As many of you know, climate is an increasing pressing issue around the world, but specifically in the GCC region. We've seen sparse rainfall, arid terrain, and high temperatures. Even under current climate conditions, the cities around the Gulf experience extreme conditions of humid heat wave in the summer, better known as the wet bulb temperature, which we've been hearing more and more about in this region and North Africa. This is a measurement that plays a defining role on how the future will look like and what we can do to sustain it. That's why ahead of the G20 summit in Riyadh, we are joining forces with Aon Collective to produce a research paper on the state of climate and health research in the GCC. Alongside MIT Professor Tahar, we are bringing together world-leading researchers from 3 research centers, as I mentioned, JWAF, JPAL, and the Jameel Institute, to identify what we know on climate change and health in the GCC. This paper will summarize the state of the climate change and public health in the GCC and examine the most up-to-date and robust scientific research. The F20 is a great platform to showcase solutions to today's most pressing challenges, and I look forward to sharing the outcomes. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being so pointed. How do you actually see the transfer of the research that you're instigating, that you're sort of holding an umbrella over and helping come about into public knowledge?
Well, it's many of the institutes do publish these works. So we've seen a lot of impact with governments. We work very closely with governments across the region and help them address some of these issues, whether it's poverty, whether it's health. And now there's a new chapter with JPAL on specifically on climate change. In fact, this year we opened our Cairo branch at the American University, and that will deal quite strongly with climate change. So working very closely with ministries or municipalities for that matter. What's also important, we of course have a foundation, but we are also a private organization and a corporate responsible company. We also address these issues through businesses. I encourage many private companies in the region, family offices and the like, to go into this sector, whether it's renewables or battery storage or recycling or water desalination or among many things. This is a growing sector which is very important and will play a big role in the coming 25 years. So this is something we take quite seriously from a corporate point of view and of course from a philanthropic point of view.
Thank you very much.
So that sort of encouragement to the private sector is key for us also.
Klaus has one more question.
Yes, it's really sounding perfect, Fady, because you are also somehow the bridge builder we need in all different parts of the world, and how to not interconnect them in the right way. And you speak with business, you have background of think tank, and you reach out to politicians, and really that is needed. And of course, that's built on trust. Perhaps you can give us some insight how you think we can build up more trust, because we have quite a lot of mistrust worldwide, also from some political leaders towards multilateralism and others. But we need cooperation, and cooperation needs trust. Can you give some insights on this, how you and your community can help on this?
Well, I think it's a battle. Of course, it's quite difficult to convince everyone of what you're trying to do, or what many of us are trying to do. I think it's important to show benefit. You know, my colleague previously was talking about Japan and what she was doing there. And she seems to be talking a lot to I assume, many of the trading companies or established companies to rethink their strategy. I think there's so much you can do in terms of convincing government. I think you can convince the private sector much more, at least in my case. And that's where I would like to put my resources, to go into something that is sustainable, something that is resilient, something that has a bright future, and something that you can be proud of and investors want. So I think the private markets, I think the private investor or individual investor are demanding this, slowly but surely. And I would like that to be promoted in our region too. You see this in Europe, you see it in the US, you see it in Japan starting to happen, I guess. But I'd like to see it more pick up a momentum, that you can both have a positive impact, make profit, make a margin, and make a difference at the same time. I think this is where you can go really far. I think this is where legislation can change because they see the benefit of it. So that's very important.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Fady, thank you also for speaking English, because I know that you, Mika, could have just chatted away in Japanese, but then you might have lost some of us. So absolutely fantastic that you were with us. Thank you for your time and your thoughts, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And now we are transitioning. We're transitioning from the keynotes, sort of say, we open up the umbrella of the views of the foundation community. A couple of them are going to respond to the recommendations. So we've already got the lineup ahead. But Klaus, I think we are also within this context. You were saying earlier there's going to be the G20 summit at the end of November. However, there are some important meetings happening right at the moment, and quite curious. Yesterday we had ministers that were actually talking about the issues close to our heart.
Absolutely, and there's some bad news we heard via our channels that yesterday the ministers' meeting for the environment came out with no communique, with no common statement. And that is really a big problem for the ongoing process, because other ministers will meet in a sequence up to the summit at the end of November. And who else than the environmental ministers could bring up the right message on climate? If it's done by the energy ministers, it would be great, but we have some experience with this. So that is now a must to speed on towards the next Sherpas meeting. And that's at the end of September, the third Sherpas meeting. And our foundations, the specific ones in their national context, will forward these recommendations from F20 now to the Sherpas finance ministers in the both tracks of G20 to show up, please do it. Perhaps there's one country really is not willing to do it. And then we have the same situation with 19-1 than that we had in Japan last year and in Argentina 2 years ago. And I think quite soon we have a person here with us who can say a little bit what's happening in the US context that perhaps helps us to find out what is the next future in these gatherings of the G20 and what is possible there. But I think, as I mentioned before, every country has to do the best they can.